In the quiet spaces between stars, where time stretches and memory thins, there exists a story that does not rush to be understood. Interstellar unfolds less like a traditional tale of exploration and more like a recovered archive, a meditation on what humanity carries with it when it leaves its home behind. The story of Interstellar does not begin among the stars, but in the soil. It opens on a version of Earth that has not been destroyed by war or sudden catastrophe, but by something slower, more intimate, and therefore more difficult to resist. This is a planet failing quietly. Crops grow thin, wind carries dust through open windows. The sky remains blue, yet the future has narrowed almost beyond recognition. Humanity, once defined by expansion and curiosity, has retreated inward, focused not on what lies ahead, but on what can still be salvaged from what remains. This Earth is not unfamiliar. It echoes the historical memory of the American Dust Bowl, a time when land turned against those who depended on it, and survival became a matter of endurance rather than ambition. In this future, the past has returned, not as nostalgia, but as warning. The atmosphere is deteriorating. Nitrogen blight consumes crops one species at a time. Corn, resilient and adaptable, and has become the last dependable food source, and with it the last symbol of agricultural hope. Everything else has already been surrendered. Education has shifted accordingly. Schools no longer teach the stars as destinations, but as mistakes. The Apollo missions, once proof of human ingenuity, are now framed as propaganda, extravagant myths created to bankrupt rival nations. The redefinition of history is subtle but deliberate. When survival becomes uncertain, an imagination is treated as a liability. Dreams are not outlawed, but they're quietly discouraged, softened into irrelevance. Curiosity, once humanity's greatest strength, is now considered wasteful. Within this atmosphere of quiet decline lives Joseph Cooper, a man whose personal history reflects the broader loss of direction suffered by his species. Cooper was trained as an engineer and pilot, raised during a time when humanity still believed the universe was meant to be explored. His instincts are shaped by motion, by calculation, by the belief that problems exist to be solved rather than endured. Yet the world no longer has use for such instincts. Cooper is now a farmer, not by choice, but by necessity. He works the land because the land is all that remains. This shift is not portrayed as tragic in a dramatic sense. There is no single moment of collapse. Instead, the tragedy lies in normalization. Cooper adapts. He repairs harvesters, navigates dust storms, and measures success in yields rather than trajectories. His days are governed by weather and soil, not equations or flight paths. The skills that once defined him have been repurposed, compressed into a life that demands practicality over aspiration. He survives, but survival is not the same as purpose. The weight of this compromise is most evident in Cooper's relationship with his children, particularly his daughter Murph. Murph is young, observant, and resistant to the idea that the world is as small as it appears to be. Where adults have accepted limitation, she senses contradiction. Her bedroom becomes a space where the ordinary rules of the world seem unreliable. Books fall from shelves without explanation. Dust gathers in patterns that resemble intention rather than chance. These moments are not presented as spectacle, but as discomfort, small disturbances in an otherwise predictable reality. To Murph, these events are personal. She interprets them as messages, perhaps from something she calls a ghost. To Cooper, they are anomalies, puzzles to be solved. Yet even as he attempts to rationalize them, they awaken something dormant within him. The idea that the universe might still be speaking, still responding, unsettles the carefully maintained logic of resignation that defines this era. If something unknown can reach into a child's bedroom, then perhaps the future has not fully closed. Beyond the family, the wider human context reinforces this tension between endurance and denial. Society has reorganized itself around the assumption that humanity's story is nearing its final chapter. Resources are rationed, innovation is minimal, risk is avoided not because it is dangerous, but because it is unnecessary. The collective goal is not progress, but longevity. The species has become conservative in the most literal sense, dedicated to preserving what little remains, even if that preservation comes at the cost of stagnation. This cultural shift reframes heroism. In earlier ages, heroes were explorers, pioneers, individuals who left home in pursuit of something unknown. In this world, heroism is quieter. It is measured in consistency, in obedience to necessity, in the ability to endure without complaint. Cooper's son Tom embodies this adaptation. He accepts the future as it is presented to him, grounded in land and labour. Murph, by contrast, resists. She senses that acceptance may itself be a form of surrender. The emotional centre of this chapter lies not in conflict but in imbalance. Cooper stands between two eras, between a past defined by outward motion and a present defined by contraction. His internal struggle mirrors humanity's own uncertainty. Is survival enough if it requires abandoning the impulse to reach beyond oneself? Or is the refusal to dream simply another way of choosing extinction, slower but no less certain? Or dust storms arrive without warning, swallowing landscapes and homes alike. They are not violent in the cinematic sense, but oppressive, reducing visibility, infiltrating lungs, coating memories. Dust becomes a symbol of time's erosion, of everything solid gradually returning to particulate matter. It enters schools, kitchens, bedrooms. There is no clear boundary between safety and exposure. The world itself feels porous, unable to protect those who live upon it. And yet, within this decay, small acts of resistance persist. Murph's insistence that the anomalies in her room mean something. Cooper's inability to fully accept the narrative that humanity's best days are behind it. These are not revolutions, but hesitations, moments where resignation falters. In a society that has agreed to stop asking questions, even curiosity becomes disruptive. This chapter establishes the fundamental tension that will shape everything that follows. Before there is space travel, before there are wormholes and distant worlds, there is a decision to be made about identity. Humanity must choose whether it sees itself as a species meant only to survive, or one meant to explore, even when exploration carries risk, loss, and uncertainty. Cooper's life on Earth is not merely background, it is the emotional gravity well from which all later sacrifices will derive meaning. The Earth of Interstellar is not dying because it has been attacked, but because it has been accepted. The danger is not extinction alone, but quiet acquiescence to a diminished future. Chapter 1 closes not with departure, but with containment, with a world holding its breath, uncertain whether the next step forward is even permitted. The weight of staying presses down on every character, shaping their choices long before any of them look up at the stars and consider leaving. And in that stillness, beneath the drifting dust and rewritten histories, the question lingers unspoken. If humanity was never meant to remain in one place forever, what happens when it forgets how to move? If Chapter 1 establishes a world defined by contraction, then Chapter 2 turns inward, toward the smaller, more intimate spaces where the universe begins to resist that narrowing. The bedroom of Murph is not remarkable by design. It is a child's room, modest and practical, filled with the remnants of a world that still expects children to grow up. Yet within this confined space, the rules that govern the rest of Earth begin to loosen. Objects move without touch. Books fall, not randomly, but repeatedly as though selected. Dust settles into lines that suggest pattern rather than chaos. These events are quiet, almost apologetic, and it is precisely this restraint that gives them weight. Murph names the disturbance a ghost. The word is less an assertion than a placeholder, an attempt to give shape to something that refuses immediate explanation. In a society that has trained itself to reject the unknown, Murph's interpretation is both childish and radical. She does not dismiss what she cannot understand. Instead, she accepts its presence and tries to listen. Her openness stands in contrast to the adults around her, whose survival has depended on reducing the world to what can be measured and controlled. Joseph Cooper approaches the phenomenon differently. For him, mystery is not a companion, but a problem. His instinct is not to believe, but to test. Yet this skepticism is not rooted in denial. It is grounded in discipline, and in the belief that the universe, however vast, operates according to rules. Cooper's response to Murph's fear is not dismissal, but investigation. He stays in the room. He watches, he measures. In doing so, he bridges two forms of engagement with the unknown: emotional intuition and analytical inquiry. The language through which the phenomenon communicates is not visual or verbal, but physical. Gravity, the most familiar and least understood of forces, becomes the medium. Books fall because they are pulled. Dust moves because it responds to invisible curvature. The choice of gravity is significant. Unlike light or sound, gravity cannot be blocked. It permeates all matter, shaping motion across scales both cosmic and domestic. By using gravity, the message reaches not only Murph's bedroom, but Cooper's memory, his training, his sense of how the universe is structured. As Cooper begins to document the events, a pattern emerges. The books fall in binary sequence, a system of meaning stripped to its most fundamental form. This is not randomness, it is instruction. The realization unfolds slowly, without urgency, as though the universe itself is careful not to overwhelm. What Murph experiences as haunting, Cooper recognizes as communication. The distinction matters. To name something a ghost is to place it in the past. To recognize it as a message is to accept that the future may still be speaking. This moment represents a subtle but profound shift in the narrative. The universe of Interstellar does not announce its mysteries through spectacle. It whispers through repetition. It waits to be noticed. In a world that has taught itself to stop looking up, the message arrives not in the sky but in a child's room, encoded in dust and gravity, patient enough to be misunderstood until someone is ready to listen. The emotional resonance of this chapter lies in the relationship between father and daughter. Murph's fear is not of the unknown itself, but of being unheard. She senses meaning, but lacks the tools to articulate it. Cooper, by engaging with the phenomenon rather than dismissing it, validates her experience. He does not confirm the existence of a ghost, but he confirms that her perception matters. This act of belief, measured, conditional, but genuine, becomes a foundation for everything that follows. Outside the bedroom, the world remains unchanged. Crops still fail, dust still drifts, schools still rewrite history. Yet within this small domestic space, the future begins to exert pressure on the present. The message encoded in gravity leads Cooper to coordinates, though their significance is not yet fully understood. What matters is not where they lead, but that they exist at all. They suggest intention, purpose, design, gravity. Often treated in science fiction as an obstacle to be overcome, here becomes a guide. It bends paths, not only of objects but of lives. The force that anchors humanity to Earth also becomes the means by which it is invited to leave. This duality reflects the central philosophical tension of the story. The same laws that limit us also enable us. Constraint and possibility are not opposites, but reflections of one another. Murph, sensing that the message is meant for her father, experiences a quiet grief. She does not yet understand what the coordinates represent, but she understands what they threaten. Communication implies response implies action, and action in this world often means departure. Her resistance to the ghost is therefore not fear of the unknown, but fear of loss. She senses instinctively that the universe is asking something of her father, and that answering may take him away from her. Cooper, for his part, recognizes the significance of the moment, even as he resists its implications. He has learned to live within limits. He has accepted a smaller life, because it allowed him to stay. The coordinates challenge that acceptance. They reopen questions he has spent years trying to silence. If there is something, or someone, guiding him, then staying may no longer be the most responsible choice. The weight of that realization settles slowly, without drama. Chapter 2 does not end with revelation, but with alignment. Emotion and reason, intuition and analysis, past and future begin to overlap. The ghost is no longer a superstition, but not yet an answer. It exists in a liminal space, much like the world itself, caught between what has been lost and what has not yet been imagined. In this way, the chapter deepens the story's central thesis. The universe does not force humanity forward, it offers invitation, it leaves signs. Or whether those signs are recognized depends not on intelligence alone, but on willingness. The willingness to believe that meaning still exists beyond survival, and that even in a dying world, the future may still be reaching back, asking to be found. The coordinates revealed through gravity do not announce themselves as destiny. They appear instead as data, numbers without story, precise and indifferent, waiting to be interpreted by a mind still capable of curiosity. For Joseph Cooper, the act of writing them down is almost reflexive, an old habit resurfacing after years of dormancy. He records them not because he yet believes in what they promise, but because recording is a form of respect. To ignore a pattern is to declare it meaningless. And Cooper is no longer certain that meaning has vanished from the world. The journey that follows is understated. There is no call to adventure in the traditional sense, no ceremony marking departure. Cooper takes Murph with him, not because the road is dangerous, but because separation has become an instinctive threat. He does not yet know what the coordinates signify, only that they point away from the routines that have defined his recent life. As they drive, the land remains familiar, flat, dusty, exhausted. The world does not change simply because someone begins to question it. The coordinates lead them to a place that should not exist. Hidden in plain sight, protected not by secrecy alone, but by public disbelief, lies a facility dedicated to a version of humanity that the world has agreed to forget. Beneath layers of farmland and abandoned infrastructure operates a remnant of ambition. NASA, reduced in scale, but not in purpose. It is a repository of suppressed history and a sanctuary for questions deemed impractical by a civilization focused solely on survival. The revelation is not framed as triumph. It is quiet, almost mournful. The walls of the facility hold echoes of what humanity once believed about itself, that it was capable of reaching beyond its immediate needs, that exploration was not indulgence but necessity. Cooper's recognition here is deeply personal. He does not discover a new world, he rediscovers himself. And the skills he was told were obsolete are not only relevant, but urgently needed. Within this hidden space, the philosophy of the broader world is inverted. Where society above has narrowed its vision, this place has preserved it. Engineers still calculate trajectories. Physicists still argue over equations. The language of the future is still spoken, albeit in hushed tones. The contrast is stark. Above ground, children are taught that reaching for the stars was a lie. Below ground, adults work tirelessly to make that lie true again. Murph's presence within this environment is crucial. She moves through the facility not with awe, but with vindication. The ghost that frightened her was never a figment of imagination, but a conduit. Her fear is replaced by understanding, though the cost of that understanding is not yet clear. She has helped open a door that cannot easily be closed. In doing so, she has altered the trajectory of her family, even as she struggles to comprehend the scale of that alteration. The coordinates beneath the dust symbolize more than a physical location. They represent the buried persistence of human identity. Even as the world above has rewritten history, to justify retreat, someone has chosen to remember. This remembering is an act of defiance, but also of responsibility. To remember what humanity is capable of is to accept the burden of acting on that capability. For Cooper, the meeting with this hidden world reframes his life not as a series of compromises, but as preparation. His years as a pilot, his training as an engineer, even his forced adaptation to farming, all of it converges here. The universe, it seems, has not wasted him. The realization is both affirming and unsettling. Purpose, once rediscovered, demands sacrifice. Chapter 3 settles into a reflective stillness as its implications take root. The coordinates were not an escape from Earth, but a confrontation with what Earth has chosen to abandon. The dust that buried the message mirrors the dust that has settled over human ambition. Unearthing one requires confronting the other. As Cooper stands between these two worlds, the one that endures and the one that dares, the question is no longer whether humanity can leave Earth, but whether it still remembers why it ever should. And in that tension, beneath layers of soil and silence, the future waits, not urgently, not impatiently, but with the quiet certainty that choice, once revealed, cannot be unseen. Departure, in Interstellar, is not framed as bravery, it is framed as fracture. By the time Joseph Cooper understands what the coordinates truly represent, the decision before him has already begun to erode the life he has constructed. The mission offered to him is not an invitation born of optimism, but a calculation shaped by scarcity. Earth is failing. Humanity is running out of time. Exploration is no longer an expression of curiosity, but a contingency plan for survival. Within the underground corridors of NASA, the language spoken is precise, measured, and restrained. There is no attempt to romanticize the task ahead. The scientists and engineers who remain understand the weight of what they are asking. To leave Earth now is to accept the possibility of never returning. It is to step outside the slow rhythm of planetary life and enter a domain where time itself behaves differently, where absence is not counted in days or years, but in entire lifetimes. The moral architecture of the mission is revealed gradually. Humanity has not found a solution to Earth's collapse. It has found only options, each incomplete, each burdened with loss. The plan is divided not by optimism, but by necessity. One path places faith in relocation, in the idea that the species can move outward and begin again elsewhere. The other places faith in knowledge, and in the hope that understanding gravity might allow humanity to lift itself free from planetary dependence altogether. Both paths require time, neither guarantees success. At the centre of this calculus stands Professor Brand, whose authority is rooted not in power, but in endurance. He represents a generation that still remembers the first age of exploration, yet has lived long enough to see its promise erode. His belief in the mission is not naive. It is tempered by decades of failure and compromise. When he speaks of sacrifice, it is not as an abstract virtue, but as a currency that has already been spent. For Cooper, the choice to leave is complicated, not by doubt about the mission's importance, but by certainty about its cost. His children are not abstract symbols of the future. They are immediate, living anchors. Murph, in particular, experiences the impending departure not as a heroic calling, but as abandonment. She understands, even at her young age, that leaving Earth means leaving time itself. The person who goes may not return as the person who left. The domestic space becomes charged with unsaid truths. Conversations slow. Words are chosen carefully, not to clarify, but to avoid irreversibility. Cooper does not frame his decision as destiny. He frames it as responsibility. He tells himself that staying would be easier, but easier does not equate to right. Yet this logic offers little comfort to Murph, and whose resistance is grounded not in misunderstanding, but in emotional accuracy. She senses that the mission demands something no explanation can replace. The night before departure is marked by stillness rather than drama. There are no grand speeches, no final reconciliations. What remains unsaid carries more weight than what is spoken. Murph's refusal to accept her father's departure becomes an act of quiet defiance. She does not argue against the mission's importance, and she rejects its premise that the future must always be purchased with the present. This moment crystallizes one of the film's central tensions, the conflict between collective survival and individual connection. Humanity's future may depend on people like Cooper leaving behind everything that makes survival meaningful. The mission demands not only technical expertise but emotional severance. To move forward, something must be left behind, and what is left behind cannot follow. And as Cooper prepares to depart, time begins to assert its dominance. Every minute spent hesitating is a minute lost to the mission. Yet every step toward the spacecraft feels like an acceleration away from his children's lives. The paradox is unavoidable. To save them, he must leave them. To preserve the species, he must fracture his family. The logic is sound. The cost is immeasurable. Chapter 4 does not resolve this contradiction. It allows it to exist, heavy and unresolved. The act of leaving is not sanctified. It is presented as a wound inflicted in the name of hope. Cooper's departure marks the moment when the story fully commits to its central premise, that survival, stripped of sacrifice, is impossible, and that love, when tested by distance and time, does not weaken, it complicates. As the engines prepare to ignite, Earth remains silent. There is no judgment, no blessing. The planet that has given everything it can offers no guidance on whether leaving is an act of faith or an admission of failure. Cooper steps forward anyway, carrying with him the knowledge that some bonds are not meant to be preserved intact, but stretched across impossible distances, enduring not because they are unbroken, but because they refuse to disappear. The departure from Earth does not immediately feel like escape. For a time, it resembles continuation. Procedures, calculations, systems checks, rituals that mirror those Cooper has known all his life. Yet beyond these familiar motions lies something profoundly unfamiliar, the first deliberate step humanity has taken toward the unknown in generations. The destination is not another planet, but an anomaly placed with unsettling precision near Saturn, a wormhole, stable, artificial in implication, if not in design, waiting patiently as though it is always expected to be found. This structure is not treated as a miracle, it is treated as a question. Wormholes, as theoretical constructs, represent shortcuts through space-time, bridges between distant points that would otherwise be separated by impossible distances. Their existence implies not only advanced understanding, but intent, as someone or something has chosen to place it where humanity could eventually reach it. The implication is quiet, but enormous. It suggests that humanity's survival may already be entangled with forces operating on scales beyond its comprehension. For Joseph Cooper, the approach to the wormhole is marked less by awe than by restraint. As a pilot, he understands the danger of reverence. Wonder can distract, precision cannot. Yet even his discipline cannot fully suppress the weight of the moment. The spacecraft drifts toward a boundary where known physics begins to fold inward, where distance and direction lose their ordinary meanings. The universe, long treated as indifferent, now appears to have prepared a passage. Alongside Cooper travels Dr. Amelia Brand, whose presence introduces a different form of engagement with the unknown. Where Cooper's relationship to space is defined by navigation and control, Brand's is defined by inquiry and interpretation. And she does not see the wormhole solely as a tool, but as evidence. Proof that humanity's story may not be isolated. Her perspective does not diminish the danger, it contextualizes it. If the wormhole is a gift, it is one that demands understanding rather than gratitude. The passage through the wormhole is neither violent nor serene. It is disorienting. Space compresses and stretches, folding sensory perception into unfamiliar configurations. Time does not behave erratically, but differently, or as though operating under rules that have not yet been translated into human language. This is not travel, as humanity has known it. It is transition. an acknowledgement that the universe is structured in ways that resist intuitive comprehension. What lingers most is the absence of hostility. The wormhole does not test humanity. It does not reject or endanger them unnecessarily. It allows passage. This neutrality carries its own significance. The universe is not presented as benevolent, but as permissive. It does not intervene directly, but it opens doors. Whether humanity is worthy of passing through them is left unresolved. Beyond the wormhole lies a new frontier, not because it is unexplored, but because it reframes exploration itself. The stars ahead are not destinations chosen at random. They are candidates, selected based on signals left behind by earlier explorers, humans who travelled through this same passage years before and never returned. Their absence is not framed as failure, but as data. Each signal represents not only hope, but warning. As the spacecraft stabilizes on the far side of the wormhole, the scale of separation becomes clear. Earth is no longer distant in miles, but in causality. Messages sent back will arrive years later. Responses will arrive decades after that. The mission has crossed a threshold where cause and effect are no longer neatly aligned. Decisions made now will echo into futures the crew will never see. This realization alters the emotional landscape of the mission. Leaving Earth was painful but comprehensible. Leaving time itself introduces a different form of loss. Cooper understands that even if he survives, he will return to a world that has moved on without him. His children will age in his absence. Their lives will unfold independently of his presence. The wormhole does not merely transport him through space, as it dislocates him from the continuity of human experience. Yet within this dislocation lies the film's quiet assertion of faith. Humanity is not crossing the wormhole blindly. It is responding to an invitation that presumes continuity, that assumes someone, somewhere, believes humanity will endure long enough to matter. Whether that belief originates from future humans or another intelligence entirely remains unresolved, and perhaps intentionally so. The ambiguity preserves the focus where the story insists it belongs, not on who built the bridge, but on whether humanity will choose to cross it responsibly. Chapter 5 situates Interstellar firmly within its larger philosophical frame. Exploration is no longer conquest, it is dialogue. The universe is not a frontier to be claimed, but a structure to be interpreted. The wormhole stands as both passage and mirror, reflecting humanity's capacity for trust, restraint, and humility. And as the stars beyond the wormhole settle into view, the mission enters a new phase, one defined not by departure, but by consequence. The path forward is open but not infinite. Choices must be made, worlds must be judged, and time will exact its price with indifference. The ancient intelligence implied by the wormhole does not guide those choices. It only ensures that they are possible. And in that possibility, fragile and immense, her humanity takes its first true step away from home, not as conquerors of space, but as guests within it. Beyond the wormhole, the universe does not reveal itself as hostile, but as indifferent in a more profound way. The first destination chosen by the crew is a planet whose promise lies not in what it offers, but in what it seems to confirm. Miller's planet orbits close to Gargantua, a gravitational giant whose presence shapes everything nearby. The data left behind suggests viability, water, surface stability, time dilation, that while extreme, remains theoretically manageable. And in the abstract language of equations, the planet appears worth the risk. Time, however, is no longer an abstract variable. Near Gargantua, relativity asserts itself with unforgiving clarity. Minutes on the planet's surface correspond to years on Earth. This is not merely a scientific complication, it is an existential one. Every decision carries temporal weight. Every hesitation compounds loss elsewhere. The crew understands this in theory, long before they experience it in practice. But understanding does not soften consequence. As Joseph Cooper descends toward the planet alongside Dr. Amelia Brand, the landscape appears deceptively simple. An endless, shallow ocean stretches in all directions, broken only by distant mountain-like formations that reveal themselves too late as waves. The planet offers no solid ground, no shelter, no horizon that promises stability. It is a world defined by motion, yet paradoxically stagnant, a surface that resets itself with each passing surge. The tragedy of Miller's planet lies in its subtlety. There is no immediate catastrophe. The danger does not announce itself loudly. Instead, it accumulates quietly, minute by minute, wave by wave. The crew's initial optimism gives way to the realization that the data they trusted was incomplete, distorted by the very relativistic effects that made the planet accessible. The signals that suggested habitability were sent by a human being, overwhelmed by conditions she could not survive. Time becomes the true antagonist here, not because it accelerates violently, but because it slips away unnoticed. Each second spent navigating the water, retrieving data, attempting rescue, translates into years lost elsewhere. Above the planet, Romilly waits alone aboard the Endurance, fully aware that his solitude is expanding with every moment the others remain below. His waiting is not passive. It is a form of sacrifice measured not in danger, but in duration. The emotional weight of this chapter does not come from the threat of death, but from the certainty of loss. Cooper understands that every choice made on the planet reshapes his relationship with the people he left behind. His children are aging without him. Entire chapters of their lives are unfolding in his absence. The water beneath his feet is shallow, yet the temporal distance it creates is immeasurable. Miller's planet functions as a demonstration rather than a warning. It shows with austere clarity what happens when humanity underestimates time's role in survival. Space does not merely challenge physical endurance, it fractures continuity. The crew's instruments may survive the planet, but their shared timeline does not. By the time they escape its surface, the cost has already been paid. Chapter 6 ends not with resolution, but with aftermath. The data recovered is valuable, yet the price extracted by time feels disproportionate. The crew leaves the planet diminished, carrying with them the knowledge that every future decision will be shadowed by what has already been lost. Time, once treated as a dimension to be navigated, reveals itself as something closer to an adversary, silent, patient, and unyielding. In this encounter, Interstellar clarifies one of its most sobering truths. Survival is not only about where humanity can go, but about what it is willing to lose along the way. Time does not negotiate. It does not forgive. It only moves forward, indifferent to intention, leaving those who cross its boundaries to reckon with the distance they have created. If Miller's planet revealed time as an adversary, then the next destination reveals something quieter, and in many ways more unsettling. The danger of hope when it is divorced from truth. The world chosen next is cold, distant, and seemingly stable. Man's planet, a frozen body whose signals promise solid ground and breathable conditions. Compared to the endless motion of water, ice appears reassuring. It suggests permanence, structure, a surface that will not shift beneath one's feet. In the language of survival, it feels dependable. The promise of this world is inseparable from the man who endorsed it. Dr. Mann, once regarded as the best of humanity's explorers. Chosen for his intellect and resolve, Mann embodied the ideal qualities required for such a mission. His data carried weight not because it was optimistic, but because it came from someone trusted to be honest even in despair. That trust, long preserved through distance and time, becomes the mission's most dangerous assumption. Upon arrival, the planet presents itself as lifeless but orderly. Ice stretches across the surface, fractured yet stable, reflecting distant starlight without warmth. The environment does not actively resist human presence. It simply does not accommodate it. Survival here would require adaptation, patience, and above all, time humanity no longer possesses. Still, compared to extinction, even this frozen austerity appears acceptable. Or when man is discovered alive, preserved in cryosleep, his awakening is framed not as triumph, but as relief. Human presence, after such vast isolation, carries emotional gravity of its own. The crew responds not only as scientists, but as social beings starved of familiarity. Man's survival feels like validation, that endurance is possible, that the mission has not been a succession of losses alone. Yet beneath this relief lies dissonance. Man's data, once examined more closely, does not align with observed conditions. The planet is not viable, its ice conceals instability, its atmosphere cannot sustain long-term human life. The signals that suggested otherwise were not misinterpreted, they were falsified. This revelation does not arrive as a dramatic confession, but as a gradual erosion of certainty. The truth emerges reluctantly, resisted not by evidence, but by need. Man's deception is not framed as villainy in a conventional sense. It is framed as fear. And alone on a dead world, confronted with the certainty of dying unnoticed, he chose survival over integrity. The lie was not meant to doom humanity, it was meant to save himself. In this context, deception becomes a symptom of isolation rather than malice. Man's failure is not intellectual, but moral, a collapse of responsibility under unbearable solitude. For Joseph Cooper, this encounter forces a painful reckoning. The mission's foundation rests on trust in data, in intention, in the assumption that those sent ahead would act not for themselves, but for the species. Man's life fractures that foundation. It introduces the possibility that even humanity's best representatives may falter when stripped of community and consequence. The confrontation that follows is restrained, almost clinical. Man attempts to justify his actions, not through denial, but through reframing. He argues that survival instincts are not moral failures, but evolutionary imperatives. In isolation, ethics become abstract, responsibility diffuses, the individual becomes the last remaining witness to their own choices. Man's reasoning is chilling, not because it is illogical, but because it is internally consistent. This is where Interstellar sharpens its philosophical edge. The film does not condemn man as an aberration. It presents him as a plausible outcome of the mission's design. To ask individuals to bear the weight of humanity alone is to invite distortion. And isolation does not merely test character, it reshapes it. Without relational anchors, even the concept of truth becomes negotiable. The physical consequences of man's actions escalate quickly, but they are secondary to the ethical rupture already sustained. His attempt to escape responsibility, to secure his own survival at the expense of the mission, endangers not only lives, but the fragile trust that allows collective action across time and distance. And in contrast to Cooper's earlier choice to leave Earth for others, man's choice isolates survival from sacrifice. Ice in this chapter functions as both environment and metaphor. It preserves, but it also immobilizes. It reflects light, but offers no warmth. Man's world is one where life can be delayed but not sustained. His lie, like the ice itself, maintains the appearance of stability while concealing emptiness beneath. What initially seemed solid fractures under pressure, revealing nothing capable of supporting the future. As the crew departs man's planet, they carry with them more than lost time and damaged equipment. They carry a lesson about the limits of endurance without connection. Hope, when severed from honesty, becomes destructive. Survival, when pursued alone, ceases to be survival at all. Chapter 7 closes with a sobering recalibration. The universe is not only vast and indifferent, it also reflects humanity back to itself. The greatest threat encountered so far has not been gravity, time, or hostile worlds, but fear, quiet, rationalized, and deeply human. In recognizing this, the mission moves forward altered, stripped of certain illusions, yet sharpened in resolve. The path ahead remains uncertain, but one truth has crystallized. Humanity cannot be saved by individuals acting alone. Whatever future awaits must be built on connection, accountability, and a willingness to endure not just physical distance, but moral responsibility across it. After ice and deception, the mission enters a quieter phase, one defined less by external threat than by internal reckoning. The destruction left in the wake of Dr. Mann's choices cannot be undone. Time has been lost, trust has been eroded, options have narrowed. The Endurance drifts forward not with confidence, but with deliberation, carrying a crew forced to reassess not only where they are going, but how they decide at all. At the centre of this reassessment stands Dr. Amelia Brand, and whose perspective begins to shift the framework through which the mission understands itself. Until now, decisions have been governed almost exclusively by data, signals, equations, probabilities, stripped of emotional context. Mann's lie has demonstrated the fragility of that approach. Data, when separated from ethical grounding, can mislead. Precision alone is not protection. Brand introduces a concept that sits uncomfortably within the mission's scientific rigor: love. She does not present it as sentimentality, but as a force, something observable in its effects, if not yet fully understood in its mechanics. Love, she suggests, may function like gravity or time, capable of transcending dimensions, capable of exerting influence across distance and duration. The idea is not that love replaces reason, but that it complements it, offering information that cannot be reduced to numbers. This proposal is met with skepticism, particularly from Joseph Cooper, whose relationship to love is deeply personal and therefore difficult to abstract. For Cooper, love is not a variable to be studied. It is a bond that has already cost him years with his children. To suggest that such a force could guide mission decisions feels to him dangerously imprecise. He fears repeating Mann's mistake, allowing subjective desire to masquerade as objective necessity. Yet Brand's argument is not that love justifies self-interest, yet it is that love may contain information beyond immediate perception. Humanity has evolved with this force as a constant companion, shaping decisions that ensure survival not just of individuals, but of communities. Parents sacrifice for children, partners endure separation, societies persist, because individuals are bound by something stronger than logic alone. To ignore this force entirely may be to discard a fundamental aspect of human cognition. The tension between Cooper and Brand reflects a deeper philosophical divide. Cooper represents a pragmatism forged by loss. He has seen what happens when emotion distorts responsibility. Brand represents a faith in connection as a guiding principle, not because it feels comforting, but because it has demonstrable consequences. The debate is not resolved through argument. It lingers unresolved, shaping the mission's emotional undercurrent. Parallel to this debate, how the narrative shifts back toward Earth, where Murph has grown from a child into a young woman, carrying the weight of her father's absence with a precision that mirrors his own. Time, having spared no one, has reshaped her not through forgetting, but through accumulation. Each year, without contact, becomes a layer of unresolved grief, compounded by the knowledge that her father chose to leave. Murph's work as a scientist places her within the same institutional framework that sent Cooper away. And yet her relationship to that framework is strained. She understands the equations. She recognizes the necessity of the mission, but she also senses that something essential is missing. The problem of gravity remains unsolved, not for lack of intelligence, but for lack of insight. The solution seems to hover just beyond reach, as though constrained by an unseen boundary. Love in this context becomes not a distraction, but a thread connecting disparate timelines. Cooper's longing for his children is mirrored by Murph's unresolved anger and hope. Their bond persists despite separation, not because it is maintained, but because it is remembered. Memory itself becomes a medium through which love operates, preserving connection even as time stretches it thin. Chapter 8 reframes the story's central conflict: The universe is no longer solely an external challenge to be overcome through ingenuity. It is also an internal landscape shaped by attachment, loss, and meaning. Love, treated here not as romance but as relational gravity, begins to assert itself as a legitimate factor in survival. It influences choice, motivates endurance, and anchors identity across distances that physics alone cannot bridge. The danger, as the crew understands, is misapplication. Love can guide, but it can also deceive. Man loved life enough to lie. Cooper loves his children enough to risk everything. The distinction lies not in the presence of love, but in how it is integrated with responsibility. When love is aligned with collective survival, it becomes generative. When it isolates, it becomes destructive. As the Endurance continues toward its remaining option, the crew carries this unresolved tension with them. Data points no longer feel sufficient, neither does intuition alone. The future will require a synthesis, a way of deciding that honours both the measurable and the immeasurable. Chapter 8 closes on this uncertainty, not as weakness, but as honesty. The mission has entered a phase where survival depends not only on where humanity can go, but on what it chooses to value. In the vast silence beyond the stars, love persists, not as an answer, but as a signal, reaching across time, insisting that connection itself may be the most enduring force humanity possesses. The approach toward Gargantua is marked not by chaos, but by precision. Every maneuver is calculated, every adjustment weighed against dwindling margins. By this point, the mission has been stripped of excess. There is no longer room for philosophical debate or deferred decisions. The path forward has narrowed to a single, irreversible course, one that requires acknowledging a truth long avoided. Survival may demand an act from which there can be no return. Gargantua is not portrayed as a monster. It does not rage or threaten. It exists with a quiet authority, a structure so massive that it bends light itself into rings and distortions. Time slows near its event horizon, stretching and thinning until cause and effect begin to separate. In this environment, linear experience, the foundation of human memory and identity, loses coherence. The black hole does not destroy time, it rearranges it. For Joseph Cooper, the decision to fall toward Gargantua is framed not as courage, but as arithmetic. Fuel, mass, trajectory, these are the terms in which the choice is expressed. Yet beneath the calculations lies something more personal. Cooper understands that what he is offering is not merely his life, but his continued presence in time. To cross the event horizon is to abandon sequence, to relinquish the assurance that moments will follow one another in any recognizable order. The maneuver succeeds in its immediate aim. The remaining crew, including Dr. Amelia Brand, is set on a viable course toward the final planet. The species retains a chance. The cost of that chance, however, is borne alone. Cooper detaches, allowing gravity to claim him, his descent controlled at first, then surrendered to inevitability. Inside Gargantua, expectation collapses. There is no singularity as imagined in simplified models, no instant annihilation. Instead, here Cooper finds himself suspended within a constructed space, a tesseract, where moments coexist rather than replace one another. Time is no longer a river, but an architecture. Past, present, and future are arranged as accessible locations, each one present, each one persistent. This is the end of linear time, and with it, the end of ordinary causality. Cooper does not observe events unfolding, he observes them existing. His daughter's childhood bedroom appears not as memory, but as coordinate. Each instant he once inhabited is now visible from the outside, separated by dimension rather than distance. The tesseract does not allow him to change everything. It allows him to change one thing, repeatedly, across many moments. The emotional gravity of this realization is understated, yet immense. Cooper understands that he has not arrived here to witness his life, but to complete it. The ghost Murph once feared was never an external entity. It was him, reaching backward through gravity. Constrained by rules he did not yet understand, attempting to communicate without violating the structure of time itself. Cause and effect loop inward, no longer distinguishable as origin or outcome. In this space, love and physics converge. The force that allows communication across dimensions is not speech or light, but gravity, chosen not for symbolism, but for necessity. Gravity alone can traverse the boundaries separating moments. Through it, Cooper encodes information into patterns Murph will recognize, just as she once recognized meaning in falling books and shifting dust. The loop closes not with spectacle, but with recognition. What unfolds here is not correction, but fulfillment. The past is not altered, it is completed. The decisions Cooper believed were his own are revealed as part of a structure that required participation from multiple points in time. Free will is not erased, but contextualized. Choice remains meaningful, even when it is woven into inevitability. Chapter 9 reframes sacrifice as continuity rather than loss. Cooper does not disappear so that others may live. He becomes distributed across time, present in moments he once believed were gone forever. His separation from Murph is no longer defined by distance, but by dimension. He is absent yet influential, silent yet essential. As the tesseract begins to collapse, its purpose fulfilled, but the narrative makes no attempt to explain who constructed it or why. The explanation is unnecessary. What matters is that humanity, at some point in its future, became capable of reaching back to preserve its own past. Survival, it seems, was never a single event, but a conversation across generations. Chapter 9 ends not with resolution, but with release. Cooper lets go of the final moment, trusting that what needed to be given has been given. Linear time resumes elsewhere, for others. For him, yes, the act of falling becomes an act of completion. The black hole, once feared as an ending, is revealed as a threshold, where time ceases to be an enemy and becomes, at last, a language humanity has learned to speak. What remains after the collapse of linear time is not confusion, but structure. Within the tesseract, experience does not proceed forward, it arranges itself. Moments are not lost to the past, but preserved as coordinates, accessible not through movement, but through understanding. Memory, long treated as a fragile echo of what has been, is revealed here as something more durable, an architecture capable of guiding action when chronology fails. For Joseph Cooper, the tesseract is not a place of discovery, but of orientation. He does not learn new facts about the universe. He learns how the pieces of his own life align. Each instant of Murph's childhood, once experienced sequentially and imperfectly, now exists in parallel. He sees not only what happened, but how it mattered. The bedroom is no longer a memory, it is a junction point. This reframing of memory carries philosophical weight. So human identity has always depended on sequence, on the assumption that who we are is shaped by what comes before. In the tesseract, sequence dissolves, yet identity persists. Cooper remains himself not because time continues, but because intention remains legible. Meaning does not require order, it requires relation. The structure allows interaction, but not intervention without constraints. Cooper cannot simply alter outcomes. He can only communicate what must be known when it can be received. The rules are strict, but not arbitrary. They preserve causality even as they bend it. In this way, the tesseract behaves less like a loophole and more like a ledger, ensuring that every effect has a corresponding cause, even if the order appears reversed. At the center of this exchange is Murph, now grown, now burdened by years of unresolved absence. The information she requires, the quantum data observed within the black hole, cannot be delivered through conventional means, as it must be embedded into a memory she will revisit, into a moment already meaningful enough to withstand reinterpretation. Cooper understands this instinctively. Love, once debated as a variable, becomes a routing mechanism. The watch he once gave Murph is chosen not for symbolism, but for stability. It is an object that persists through time measured, predictable, and intimate. Through gravitational modulation, Cooper encodes the data into the ticking of its seconds. Time previously an enemy, Odd becomes a carrier. The message is not spoken. It is lived, received, only when Murph is prepared to recognize its significance. This act completes the loop begun in childhood. The ghost was never an interruption of reality, but a feature of it, a future consequence reaching backward to ensure its own possibility. Memory becomes map. The past becomes navigable. And love, rather than distorting reason, provides the continuity required to bridge dimensions. Outside the tesseract, humanity's future hangs unresolved. Inside it, the necessary conditions for that future are quietly assembled. Cooper's role is not to save the world directly, but to place the final piece where it has always belonged. The restraint of the moment is deliberate. Salvation does not arrive with spectacle. It arrives with comprehension. As the tesseract begins to contract, its purpose fulfilled, Cooper experiences not loss, but alignment. The fragments of his life, pilot, father, farmer, our explorer, resolve into coherence. None of these identities are negated by what has occurred. They are validated. Each choice, each sacrifice, contributed to a structure larger than any single timeline could reveal. The disappearance of the tesseract is not portrayed as abandonment. It is closure. The future no longer needs to reach backward because the conditions for survival have been secured. Humanity, at some distant point, will continue forward without this intervention. The conversation across time can end. Chapter 10 reframes memory as an active force rather than a passive record. What is remembered shapes what is possible. What is loved determines what endures. In a universe where time can fracture and dimensions can fold, it is not chronology that preserves meaning, but connection. The tesseract does not teach Cooper how to escape time. It teaches him how to belong within it. As the structure fades, Cooper releases the final moment, trusting that memory has done its work. Somewhere else, later or earlier, Murph will listen, and when she does, the map will unfold, not as revelation, but as recognition. When the final data arrives, it does not announce itself as revelation. There is no sudden transformation, no dramatic shift in the world's condition. The answer to humanity's most persistent problem emerges quietly, carried not by certainty, but by patience. For Murph, now fully immersed in the work her father left behind, the encoded information hidden within time itself becomes legible only after years of effort, doubt, and persistence. Knowledge, like survival, proves cumulative. The equation that has resisted completion for decades is not unsolved due to intellectual limitation. It has been incomplete because it required information from beyond conventional space-time, data that could only be gathered from within Gargantua. Once received, the solution does not contradict existing physics, it extends it. Gravity, long treated as an obstacle, becomes a tool. The force that bound humanity to Earth becomes the means by which it can finally leave. Murph's role in this moment is not that of a prodigy delivering sudden insight. It is that of a steward completing a process that began before she could understand it. Her anger, her grief, and her years of unresolved absence have not distracted her from the work. They have sustained it. Each failure sharpened her focus. Each delay reinforced her commitment. Love, carried forward without resolution, has become endurance. As the solution is implemented, humanity's future begins to shift, not dramatically but structurally. Massive stations lift from the surface of Earth, not as symbols of triumph but as necessities. The planet is not abandoned in panic. It is left behind with deliberation. Those who depart do so not because Earth has nothing left to give, but because staying would ensure extinction. Survival, at last, becomes mobile. The transformation of society is not portrayed in detail. Instead, it is implied through restraint. So there is no celebration, no catharsis. The species moves forward because it must, not because it has been redeemed. The lesson of the past remains intact. Progress achieved without humility invites repetition of failure. Humanity survives not by reclaiming its former arrogance, but by learning to act within limits. Throughout this transition, the absence of Joseph Cooper remains palpable. His contribution is foundational, yet unseen. He is not present to witness the consequences of his sacrifice. The story does not reward him with recognition or closure. Instead, it preserves the integrity of his choice. He did not act to be remembered. He acted because the action was required. Murph, however, remembers. Her understanding of her father's departure evolves from resentment to comprehension, not through explanation, but through outcome. The equation he helped complete is not merely a scientific achievement. It is a message delivered across time, affirming that his absence was not abandonment, but participation. The distance between them, once defined by years and light, collapses into purpose. Chapter 11 reframes salvation as continuity rather than rescue. Humanity is not saved in a single moment. It is sustained through a sequence of decisions, each one dependent on trust extended across generations. The future is not secured by a hero returning home, but by knowledge arriving where it is needed, or when it is needed, regardless of personal cost. The species moves outward, carrying with it the accumulated weight of its past mistakes and hard-won insights. Gravity no longer binds humanity to a single world. Time no longer traps it within a single outcome. Yet the price of this freedom remains visible. Every station lifted into space carries with it the memory of a planet that could not be healed, only outgrown. As Earth recedes into history, the narrative resists closure. Survival is not resolution, it is continuation. Humanity endures not because it has mastered the universe, but because it has learned at last to listen, to forces it once ignored, to connections it once undervalued, and to messages carried quietly through time. Chapter 11 stands as the culmination of the story's long arc of cause and effect. The equation is solved, the species survives, yet the most significant outcome is not technological. It is relational. Across impossible distance and fractured chronology, a father and daughter complete a shared task, proving that love, when aligned with responsibility, can extend beyond the limits of time itself. The end of the journey does not arrive as a conclusion, but as a quiet convergence. When Joseph Cooper is recovered, it is not from triumph, but from drift, a drift near the remnants of a mission long completed, found by the future he helped make possible, yet never expected to inhabit. He awakens not to familiarity, but to evidence. Humanity has endured, not intact, but extended. Survival has taken a form that resembles neither victory nor return, but continuation. Or the station that receives him is a constructed world, rotating gently to simulate gravity, carrying with it the memory of Earth without its fragility. Its corridors are functional, its windows expansive, framing stars not as destinations, but as neighbours. This is not the frontier Cooper once imagined. It is quieter, more measured, shaped by lessons learned, too late to be painless. The species has not reclaimed its innocence. It has learned restraint. Cooper's presence here is anomalous. He is temporally displaced, younger than the world that now shelters him. He belongs to an earlier chapter of humanity's story, preserved by the same relativistic forces that once threatened to erase him. His survival is not celebrated publicly. There are no ceremonies, no declarations of debt. History has already moved on. His role, though essential, is complete. The reunion with Murph occurs without spectacle. Time has done what distance could not. It has transformed their relationship beyond repair into something else, understanding without proximity. Murph is now at the end of her life, surrounded by descendants who have inherited a future she helped secure. Cooper arrives not as a returning father, but as a visitor to a moment already closing. Their exchange is brief, restrained, and precise. There is no reckoning to be performed. The long years of absence have already done their work. Murph does not ask him why he left. She does not need reassurance. The equation he delivered across time is proof enough. His absence has been integrated into her life, not as loss alone, but as contribution. Love, in the end, has not demanded explanation. It has demanded completion. Murph's final act is not to hold him, but to release him. She understands something Cooper has not yet fully accepted. That reunion is not the purpose of sacrifice. Continuation is. She urges him to go, to carry forward the remaining momentum of his life toward the one place where it may still matter. The future does not need him as a father. It needs him as a participant. This moment reframes the narrative's long arc of separation. The distance between them was never meant to be closed by return. It was meant to be justified by outcome. Love, stretched across decades and dimensions, has reached its resolution not in restoration, but in acknowledgement. They have done what they needed to do. That is enough. As Cooper departs once more, the story resists finality. Beyond the station lies another world, one seeded by humanity's hope and patience, where Dr. Amelia Brand continues the work of beginning again. This is not a romantic ending. It is a responsibility passed forward. The future does not await heroes. It awaits caretakers. The closing movement of Interstellar does not elevate humanity to mastery of the cosmos. It situates humanity within it, capable of understanding certain forces, vulnerable to others, dependent always on connection. Time remains vast, space remains indifferent, yet within that indifference, meaning persists, carried not by conquest, but by continuity. Chapter 12 completes the transformation begun on a dying Earth. The story that started with dust ends with motion. Not escape, not conquest, but stewardship. Humanity survives not because it solved every problem, but because it learned which problems could only be addressed together, across generations, across distances, across time itself. The journey continues, not because it must, but because it can. And in that quiet possibility, the universe remains open, not as a challenge to be overcome, but as a space in which life, once fragile and constrained, has learned how to endure.